This is the start of a new series called Weekly Video Rental, where I watch a new anime OVA from the Japanese bubble era every single week. The 80s are often viewed with a nostalgic lens in general. In Japan, the 80s were home to the massive economic growth period, which is commonly referred to as the bubble era, because the bubble eventually burst in 1992. Many of the cultural products that were formative in the creation of two of the most popular modern forms of entertainment, video games and Japanese animation, were created during this time due to a very large influx of money. I haven't seen enough anime from this era, and I'm interested in a variety of things created back then, so I thought, why not pick a random anime OVA feature to watch every single week? This might be a very good way to expose myself to stuff classic and forgotten. Before watching each OVA, I decided to simply have a cursory read over the analyst description or the Wikipedia article before I head into it. Going in blind is part of the fun after all, and this is sort of like walking into a video store, picking up a tape you see that's interesting, and just reading the front and back, and then seeing where things go. First off, a couple of explanations and criteria before we get into the first review. Just what is an OVA? OVA stands for Original Video Animation, and is one of those English abbreviations formed in Japan by Japanese people. Video here refers to videotape, or VHS, but can more broadly still refer to laserdiscs and the sort. This just means stuff that released direct to video. This practice was common back then and has mostly faded away and replaced with being just direct to streaming or direct to YouTube or something of the sort. As you may or may not suspect, many smaller productions were released direct to video in this way. There's not a lot of overhead required to just make the tape and produce it. It led to a lot of indie productions being created. And on top of that, with the rise and adoption of home video as a thing, because it just did not exist before the 80s really, this sort of avenue for smaller creators came to be quite viable. Now as for criteria, I'm only watching stuff released between 1980 and 1992. The bubble started a bit after 1980, but this gives us basically a 10-year period that OVAs are eligible. 92 is when the bubble burst, so that's a logical cutoff point. I only want to have a one-night stand with the anime, so just one episode is good for me. And I'm not interested in that stuff. There's plenty of interesting stuff without gratuitous sex. I don't want to see that stuff. I'm coming at this from an artistic perspective, not to let one out. Meisou-Ou Boda, or Drifter King Borders, is a seinen manga which began serialization in 1986 and ran until 1989 for 151 chapters and 14 volumes in the magazine Manga Action. This OVA is based on the first arc of the manga, the Return to Society arc, from which the OVA gains its subtitle, and is 3 chapters in length. It covers that material with very few changes. This itself is pretty unique among such OVAs as far as I know, as these were often made specifically to advertise the manga in question, but even still, to those who have already experienced the story in question, just as like a fun thing that those fans could experience on the side. This isn't much different than most anime until very recently, but combined with the fact most of these OVAs only get a few episodes, tend to cover the most random arcs from the perspective of a third party, it was pretty shocking to find out this was the case, and I had only just seen the very beginning of the story, as opposed to something in the middle. As I mentioned before, I went into this basically just blind. So, I'm not aware of many things I'm aware of now as I'm recording this video, nor when I wrote the review originally for AniList. But throughout the entire thing, while I did not really understand what was going on, I quite enjoyed it. It was quite fun to watch from beginning to end. Both titles, Meisou and Boda, both seem to describe the protagonist. Meisou is like the word for one who has strayed from the proper course in life, combined with the word for king, and Boda, which probably refers to border, seems to be a made-up word to refer to protagonists, as if they just board wherever. Both Kubota and Hachisuka are basically drifters or vagrants. They don't seem to have stable jobs and live in an apartment complex that's falling apart, seemingly from paycheck to paycheck. And as what we would now call hikomori, or like shut-ins. If you've ever played Persona 5, that's just Futaro Sakura. Kubota is even described as a hardcore virgin, but her first introduction to Hachisuka is him having sex with the cashier of the nearby convenience store. While their first introductions to me don't paint them as particularly scrupulous characters, which is probably not the point, and frankly not people I have much interest in, they're steeped in mystery. Kubota first describes Hachisuka as someone he met on his travels from the Middle East to India. Playing into the vagrant imagery is a really cool scene here as he reminisces on his time in the desert. And that's something this anime does really well. Slow shots to establish setting or mood/vibe. Another instance of this is when the two arrive in Dotonbori, Osaka, which Yakuza/Like a Dragon fans will recognize as the basis for Sotenbori in that game series. The plot is basically a wacky day in the life of these two drifters, or boarders, and takes place during the 80s when it was serialized. Kubota is offered a lucrative job paying 100k yen, which accounting for inflation in the yen and then converted to USD would be about $820 today. Hachisuka is so down with his idea that he never even asks what kind of job it is, and thus we don't even find out what it is until they're en route to Osaka via Shinkansen. There seems to be a war among the Yakuza, and they're tasked with reporting on it in some capacity. But this job is naturally not as sweet as it seems. Their client awaits them a prostitute, intending to seduce the protagonist in order to force them into a terrible situation of some sort. When the boarders arrive in Shin Osaka Station, their client tells them the prostitutes, who aren't described as such naturally, will accompany them for a night on the town, so they do exactly that. Since these two are not quite middle-aged yet, and apparently hot, and they didn't just take the prostitutes to a hotel immediately, the prostitutes take a liking to them. They decide to let them escape while adjusting their makeup in the restroom. Unfortunately, their client whisks them away before the two can leave the restroom. The two are given a package and told to walk in a dangerous part of town. They soon find out the package contains a baseball bat, but are oblivious to the fact they're in Yakuza territory, and many people around them assume them to be a hitman sent to take out the family base in that area. After successfully fending off a few Yakuza, they decide to run away, figuring they shouldn't get in deeper shit than they already are. After having run away and taken some time to relax, they discuss how to get back home. After trying to hitchhike fails, Kubota says he'll take the Shinkansen back. Hachisuka is opposed to his wasted money, so he jumps into the back of the truck, expecting he'll end up in Tokyo if he just jumps into a couple of the trucks. However, he falls asleep and wakes up on a ferry to Hokkaido. I'll end my summary here, because from here it's especially interesting and fun to watch. One of the things I enjoyed about the OVA was that while the animation seemed low budget, they seemed to put great effort into small details, and the backgrounds and lighting did a great job of creating atmosphere. The music was also good, using city pop-esque songs as well as rock music. By the time the focus on atmosphere began to wane, you've already gone a decent amount of time to explore both of the characters individually as well as their relation to one another, which makes comedy building off of those aspects of the characters hit for me by that point of the OVA. So honestly, I'd say both the plot's pacing as well as the comedy were well done overall. The only real issue I have with the OVA is the ending. After seeing the OVA, I decided to see if I could find the manga somewhere online. And I found that on the magazine's official website, you can read the first volume entirely for free, but in Japanese. So I skimmed through the first few chapters, and I found that the ending was entirely taken from the beginning of chapter 6. This was probably there for the typical sort of like adding a cliffhanger at the very end, some sort of way of generating more intrigue. And this is still pretty common. You see it a lot in seasonal anime, often the ones that will probably never ever get a second season. But honestly, having that there is very confusing. I would much prefer if they just adapted chapter 3 as is, and then the entire OVA would just end with a nice, endearing scene of two now proper friends just going back home and having fun. A cursory search of those involved didn't really bring up much that caught my eye. Many of the creators influenced by this work and referenced in it aren't really well known at all outside Japan, and perhaps not even in Japan anymore. The director, however, Nobuo Ishiguro, actually has quite a few credits and is somewhat well known overseas. Among his directorial credits include Space Battleship Yamato 2, Super Dimension Fortress Macross, and Legend of the Galactic Heroes. He also continued to be involved in projects until his death in 2012 related to the Hitman Reborn and Mushishi series. The author, Marilee Caribou, passed away in 2018, but the artist, Akio Tanaka, is still alive as of this video. Information on this OVA and the manga that it's based on is basically non-existent in English, and it even doesn't have a Pixiv encyclopedia entry. Most bits of pop culture do. If you can think of anything from the last maybe 50 years, you'll find a Pixiv encyclopedia entry on it. Despite all this, it seems to be well loved among a certain set of Japanese fans who are nostalgic for the 80s. The manga seems to be very easily available digitally from multiple storefronts, and reviews are high, praising the way the bubble era was portrayed. According to Wikipedia, this series was meant to be a counter to the overflowing money during the bubble era, being able to make all electronic devices more and more compact and easy to mass produce. Evoking this idea seems to be a form of postmodernist counter-society message that was present in art at the time. This is all based on my limited research and lack of understanding of the term at the time, but this sounds pretty interesting. Perhaps focusing the story on people that were left behind during the rapid progress furthers that goal. And that's a theme that is seen in other notable bubble fiction, such as Yakuza 0, one of the best games ever made. All in all, this may have been the perfect start to this series. Not only is this work considered a bit underrated, but it also represents aspects of life from this time period. It represents some of the struggles of those who were left behind in the massive economic growth period that Japan experienced, but also some of the smaller aspects of life that are a lot more difficult to put a concrete term on. It may not be the best microcosm of life in this time period, as many celebrated works from this period and based on it, such as maybe Yakuza 0 could get that title, but that doesn't matter. The point of this series is to look at the whole breadth of anime OVAs released in this time period. And maybe one day I'll get around to checking out that manga. My to-read and watch list is forever looming above me, but I'll continue adding stuff to it.